But as I say, the arguments about immortality, the supernatural, the last things, death, judgment, heaven and hell, are or are not valid quite independently of my mental or physical state. And so there's something fishy to me in the suggestion that, okay, now that your system is breaking down, wouldn't it be a good moment for you to repudiate the convictions of a lifetime? Again, there's something about the underlying assumption there that I want to resist.
More than 20 years ago, you mentioned Thomas Paine, but more than 20 years ago, the Oxford philosopher A.J. Ayer wrote about being drawn to a red light when he'd had a near-death experience, and that was interpreted by a lot of people as a suggestion that it actually changed his views of a lifetime. Are you worried this kind of thing could happen to you?
There are two great, Freddie Ayer's dead now. He died not long after that. But there have been in the recent past two great humanists and atheist thinkers, himself and Professor Daniel Dennett, who've come very, very close to death and in a semi-conscious state, enough to allow them to speculate about consciousness independent of the brain and other things that fascinate all of us. But both of their conclusive essays on this matter are in my collection, The Portable Atheist, because they both, having undergone, so to say, that test, came out with their convictions unaltered.
Not entirely unaltered in Ayer's case. I mean, he did conclude the experience weakened his conviction that death would be the end of him. So he had a, not a conversion, but at least a doubt thrown in about his pure atheism.
Well, we can't say any more than we can say there is no God, that there is no afterlife. We can only say there is no persuasive evidence for or argument for it. But I think I'd be much more willing to say there's no evidence at all that any human being can tell you how you qualify or what's meant by seeing some bright light at the end of the tunnel or coming towards you, or that if you'll only make the right propitiation or right incantation or join the right church, they can tell you about how things will be after you're dead. I'm quite sure there's no human agency that can do that. I like surprises. If there's to be a second look around with somehow not me and not my brain, but some kind of consciousness, well, that would be more fascinating than many days I've spent in real life.
It would indeed. These debates have been going on for centuries, though, and
yes, I think will persist.
You quote Blaise Pascal, who talked about a wager that could be made, with a God that would actually allow you at the very last minute to make a deal with him, to believe for a brief period. And that wager would be that what have you got to lose?
Well, it's rightly called a wager because there's something rather hucksterish about it. And I'm not a Christian, let alone a Roman Catholic Christian, as Pascal was. And I'm also not a theorist of probability, as he was. He was a great mathematician. But I say hucksterish for this reason. His wager assumes two things. One, a very cynical and credulous God. In other words, a God who would say, well, I can see your mind working, and I know that you're wagering on me because what have you got to lose? So naturally, I'll reward you if you say you believe in me. I mean, why does that follow? Why wouldn't you think that's not a very good reason? It's not very good reasoning. It's not a very good motive. You might just as well be a God. In fact, you should prefer to be a God who would say, actually, I've more respect for the person who couldn't bring himself to believe and certainly wouldn't claim to do so in the hope of getting a favor.
Yes, we're talking now logic and, of course, a jealous
Well, not just
God.
logic. I think there's a moral tinge to this, isn't
Well, exactly, because there's an argument that the jealous God who would consign non-believers to hell is actually immoral, so why would you follow him anyway?
There's actually a Sufi prayer from the Middle Ages that is addressed to the Creator and says, Master, or however these things are addressed, and if I pray to you in the hope of getting heaven for myself, you should deny it to me. and if I pray for you only in the fear of hell, you should send me there. These would be bogus forms of belief. They'd be simply behaviorist, reward and punishment stuff, conditioned animal reflexes, coercive, and they'd require a slave mentality, which is my second objection to the Pascal wager. It demands of us that we think of this God as a cynical, rather credulous, rather capricious opportunist, easily flattered, and of ourselves as the raw material for a pretty cruel and meaningless experiment. Now, often we unbelievers are accused of being nihilistic and not seeing the lovely, deeper meanings of life. Well, what could really be more negative, more pessimistic, more cynical than the attitude I've just described?
Let's go back to those people who are praying for you, because if you are in fact cured, then they'll take credit for it to some degree and perhaps even describe you as a miracle. Are you a bit nervous about that? Because, for example, we've had 2 cases of spontaneous remission from terminal cancer that allowed very recently the first Australian saint, Mary MacKillop, to become St Mary of the Cross. It only happened a month ago. But the idea of intercession by prayer has certainly not disappeared in the 21st century.
Well, no, it hasn't, and nor will it go away as long as our fear of death persists, which I rather think that it will. We're the only mammals, we're the only primates who do know that we're going to die. And we're the only ones who have made the attempt to award ourselves under certain conditions in afterlife. And it's a very tenacious illusion, and it's very unlikely to be dispelled. Sorry, this sometimes happens. How far back should I go?
That's all right. I'm wondering, have you softened it all, and are you prepared to concede anything at all to the faithful, that there may be some value in it? I mean, the comfort that religious belief, for example, gives to people who are in the same position as you.
Tony, as with a lot of this argument, looking death more closely in the eye, as I have been doing, doesn't teach you much that you didn't already know, surprisingly enough. It focuses it a bit, brings it into quite a sharp relief. But it isn't as if I didn't already know that some people, whether they're sick or whether they're well, derive great comfort from the thought that they have a savior, that they're a member of a flock, for example. I mean, I personally am incapable of describing myself as a member of a flock for reasons that I hope are self-evident. I'm not a sheep. Some people like to be called sheep and think that they'd like to have a shepherd. And if that makes them feel happy, I must say I think it's a rather contemptible form of happiness, but doesn't bother me as long as they keep it to themselves. As long as they don't try and make me believe it, as long as they don't try and have it taught in schools, as long as they don't want the government to subsidize it, as long as they don't want to block scientific research in its name or because of it, then that's fine. As Thomas Jefferson said, I don't mind if my neighbor believes in 1 God or 15 gods. It neither picks my pocket nor breaks my leg, as long as he or she leaves me alone. I don't want to even have to know what they think. But will they requite this bargain? Of course not. Of course not. It doesn't really make them happy. They can't be happy till everyone else believes it too. And that's sinister, in my opinion, and creepy.